Now we're moving to a slightly tangential topic, very important to all of us. It's cybersecurity. Our next speaker is an advisor on digital policy to the President of Latvia. She advises the President on digital policy and information technology. Her focus is building a strong digital Latvia, and she's here to share some of the lessons she's learned in her own country. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ieva Ilves.
Good morning, good afternoon, whichever way you count the day or whenever you started it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really my honor. I'm very humbled to be in a distinguished audience, clearly much better aware of digital technologies, including cybersecurity. And I'm also very humbled because I actually presenting a perspective of a rather small country, tiny, which until now, somehow I would say until now, and by until now I mean the horrifying events in our neighborhood, war in Ukraine, which in a way has visualized to all of us, to everyone, what insecurity means. Because security so often is something which is difficult to touch, to feel, to visualize. So what Ukraine has done, or what war in Ukraine has done, it has kind of became a reminder and a visual picture of what insecurity means. And I have to say that from now on, it feels that until this point, the Baltic states seemed, with their opinions, somehow less valid, or actually very often described as paranoid, sort of having overly phobic about the neighbor to our east. And it is with a great regret, because it does cost a lot of lives of Ukrainians of this war, and it probably will cost a lot, that we all came to acknowledgement that actually on multiple issues, the tiny Baltic states in the neighborhood or other regional countries like Poland actually have been right on multiple aspects. So this war is important to pay attention, and not only because it's horrible, because it's a human catastrophe in a way, but because it is not a local war. It's not about the territories. It is war for the values, freedoms and liberties. And so, as such, I think it will touch upon us, all of us. So the physical war obviously takes place in Ukraine, but it is a global conflict of these values, and we will have to be prepared here and across all allies, not only to protect our digital assets, but actually protect our freedoms and liberties, our freedom of thought, activity, economy, that will be challenged also by digital means. So this brutal invasion of Russia has kind of drawn a very bold trajectory in history. And nothing will remain the same, obviously, after what we've seen in Bucha massacres, in the siege of Mariupol, and many other occasions. And so nothing will also remain in the world of technologies the same. So how does that translate into the digital domain from my experience? So what does cybersecurity look like? And what I can share coming from Latvia? And the answer, in a way, is a very simple, right? You build your resilience long before you are in a conflict, long before you are in war. Ukrainians have clearly done that, and I'm sure some of the speakers talked about that already. They had also already number iterations of the conflict, which probably gave a sense and time for preparations. But also West, we can't sort of be ashamed. We can rather acknowledge that we have also done a good part of work. We might think that democracy, being very transparent, is easy to exploit. It's kind of our weakness, but it's also our strength. We learn quickly by sharing information, by exchanging, by cooperating, by meeting in the conferences like this. We learn and we improve fast. Last year was very rich of different cyber incidents. You know, to name a few, SolarWinds, the bigger ones, Colonial Pipeline, multiple ransomwares. But we've seen that also none of these attacks have really knocked out our societies. So we were capable to overcome that. We learned from that, and we clearly have improved it. So let me share a few, I think, as someone who comes from political field and working a lot with society, two key underlying assumptions or threads or lessons from Latvia's cybersecurity, how we have built it over years, and what sort of describes our resilience. Because in a lot of ways, I think it starts in our head, in regards of what is that we build, design, and use. So first, it is our own, speaking on my own country, it is our political culture and style of life, the liberties, the freedoms we all enjoy that we regained 30 years ago, that unites us. And we still stand up for those, and those are the sort of very basis of our decision-making, like many countries that represented, I'm sure, here, including Germany. And so with this experience, it was kind of interesting to observe across the Baltic states, when the war was launched by Russia, that in a way, we were surprised by the fact that none of us was surprised by the war. We were all, in the Baltic states, ready and prepared for that to happen. And that comes from those last 30 years of experience, because we live geographically next door to Russia, kind of obvious. And that taught us many lessons through this 30 years history, not to speak even about sort of a century-old history. You gain certain skills which become kind of part of your mindset, part of how you work, how you behave. Over 3 decades, we have experienced, and I was now thinking back, because I actually do like to invest in future rather to revisit the past, but as I think back, I was remembering so many various tactics of retaliation when Latvian government would make its independent decision representing, democratically elected government, which somehow would not be likened by a neighbor, happens to be Russian. We would face a very heavy disinformation campaigns on any international fora. We would have slander attacks, very often actually launched on Friday afternoons. We used to joke that that's Russia's foreign ministry's favorite time to start a campaign on Friday afternoon, knowing that they will penetrate international media quickly, and it will give less space for Baltics to respond, even if at that time the people who listened to us were not many. Equally so, our businesses actually were punished endless times by so-called, you could say, economic sanctions, again, stemming from the fact that Latvian government would make a political decision. You can try to play around this game and imagine how it would be if President Macron would not have been happy with what Chancellor Merkel says, and would say, look, from now on, all my food chain is not selling German beer. And that would happen in Latvia very often. Every political step or decision not likened by neighbor would be challenged by other means. So when technologies onboarded bigger society, it scaled, it eventually digitized even government services. We always are slowest ones. We had the critical infrastructure relying on digital means. It was crystal clear to us in the Baltic states that this domain, like any other, banks, finances, businesses, economy, media, will be exploited by the adversary. In our case, Russia, but not exclusively that one. And so it would be very much aligned, not because of territorial claims, but because of values we stand for. Year 2007 seems like a long history ago. Estonia faced DDoS, famous DDoS attack, which knocked out country for 24 hours, making people finances non-accessible and creating chaos in streets, just because the decision of Estonian government was to remove or relocate the Soviet war monument to the cemetery. So one concludes that for 3 decades, and with our historic experience, Latvia, together with all Baltic states and other regional neighbors, kept its focus and sharpness, assessing risks and threats. But that never stopped us to advance. I mean, Baltics are known for being very digitized. Estonia is a famous e-country. With that assumption, living in that neighborhood, because we always kept security high on our agenda, whatever is that we were building. And so today, when we have this better clarity, unfortunately, thanks to a horrible war, where the conflict sort of comes down from, we understand that it is not a contest of the land, but it is rather a contest for values this particular country stands up for. It also becomes easier for us to define the adversary and also to define our own behavior, to assess our own risks, because in digital domain, we are all neighbors. And my second sort of a general assumption, besides our sort of historic sharpness, is also on these basics that digital is no different from anything of analog world. So anything that you can imagine can be threatened in real world, it will be mirrored in digital. And that can be a criminal, that can be a financial, but that's also international relations that do get mirrored in digital domain. So we do have to invest in all of these levels. It starts from individual, and it ends up with a state, because I'm sure you all know the very basics, you know, that the security can be compromised by the smallest thing, and those who defend the digital assets have to take care of the whole perimeter, while the other side actually has to find the only tiniest, smallest hole or weakness or vulnerability. And often that has been a human. It is also an observation from Latvian CERT, who is on a high alert working, so national cybersecurity team working high alert for the last 4 months, that they do really see an intense scanning of all resources, looking for vulnerabilities from the other side. And on a sort of informal chat, they used to tell me, you know, Ieva, what's really scary is that we see a lot of that scanning, but nothing happens. And we are worried because we don't know whether they found something, whether they're waiting for something to be right moment to exploit. But there is a very intense scanning of all resources, not only in Baltics, but actually across the whole alliance. So on the level of the government, we do have to recalibrate our policies and priorities, understanding this new context, understanding that we have actually ongoing conflict about the values in the world that will be translating into digital, into technologies. And this context matters. So keep the skills and sort of being aware what's going around in the analog world is really important in whichever job you are, whatever you are either designing, developing, innovating, providing, keep your eyes on a context, because these technologies will be used or accessed or tested. We in the Baltics just happen to be better prepared because we have been constantly challenged in all the domains for 30 years. So there is one question often related to this conflict: why there is no major cyber war yet? And we've been seeing, you know, a lot of Hollywood movies, a lot of scary stories that there will be a cyber war. And I think two things are important, and I already mentioned some. That one, we in the West are actually better prepared. We can take for that a credit. We have raised our awareness in the last decades, and we have actually really invested collectively, individually, through NATO, through EU, through other formats. But of course, security, like technologies, you never sit relaxed in a sofa once the job is done. That's a requires constant attention, a constant investment. To name a few, I will not name Latvian CERT resources because they get mostly on the web published in Latvian for our audiences, but I can name US government Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, abbreviation CISA, is doing outstanding job for the last year. If you are interested to follow American advice of what to do in a conflict situation, they do really are very transparent and very concise and very efficient. Microsoft, we've seen a lot of public-private partnerships actually developing. Microsoft is doing a great job and analyzing threat because these companies see the picture the best. And so Microsoft has been very forthcoming, publishing, helping, with SolarWinds, with other attacks. And those, again, of you who are interested in the regional developments and its global impact, just yesterday they published a short version of report of their assessment according to their networks, how they see cybersecurity situation currently. We're also seeing massive investments. I can mention European Chip Act, thinking about how do you diverse your supply chain and how do you think of more secure technologies. So no universal fix, but just to sort of encourage ourselves that we are doing a good job, but we have to continue. On the other hand, while there is no war, cyber war, I think Russia is doing a really bad job on their part. They clearly are failing on their initial plans to walk into Ukraine quickly, to take over the government, to get rid of President Zelensky, and fix the country according to their wishes. That apparently did not work out. They actually are bleeding in that war. So their primary concern is still to get every inch of land. And I would say they probably are not the most importantly right now focused on digital domains. They have used some of cyber attacks. If you read reports, they have tried to sort of destroy Ukrainian communication, influence their critical infrastructure, but it did not bring quite a result. And we haven't been seeing very big sort of mobilized attacks on our allies. But it doesn't mean we can be relaxed. Actually, it's very interesting statistics just to add from Microsoft that there is a huge interest on Western parts. I've seen intrusion efforts in 128 organizations across 42 countries outside of Ukraine. So they're really scanning and looking for weaknesses. Again, immediate neighborhood is a priority, and the US, but more and more countries get to be looked after for vulnerabilities eventually to impact. In Latvia, we have seen all kinds of attacks on charity organizations. The public support is very big in Baltic states. So anything that in digital means can be hampered in their jobs has been tried. And I believe that will remain so. According to Microsoft, of all that scanning, they judge within their systems that 29% has been successful. It depends if you are optimist or pessimist of that statistics. But it makes one feel uncomfortable. We have to continue work. Because the goal of Russia, of course, mainly is now focused on Ukraine, to disrupt their resistance and get advantage in war. But they also have a mission to inflict pain or costs among allies or countries who support Ukraine or who stands up for those values. And more, we will turn to sanctions because that's the second best tool we can use against the adversary, besides if we would go in military, might lead to the fact that actually Russian hackers and Russian other business entities might find it lucrative actually to inflict financial and economic cost back on allies or our countries. So we have to be really watching out. Ransomware is obviously one of those tools highly exploited. And a third, which I also just want to add, is that they also are massively working on cyber influence operations. And they're getting ready for a long war. And in a long war, they want to make sure that they can exploit fatigue of people, that they can divide people, that they can see doubts in the West. So Being a small nation and on borderlines with Russia, in a sum up, we are obviously inclined in cooperation, because only together we can actually be strong. That's one key to work on. We do have to invest in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity does not come at no cost. It requires technical investments, and it requires investments in skills. European Union will now dedicate a huge amount of money building digital Europe. My argument is that it has to have a mandatory, let's say 15% on any digital money assigned to be dedicated to cybersecurity. Otherwise, it's too late to add it afterwards. You have built something big. And we also have to have sort of a quick alert system to alert when threats appear, the intelligence that we have, the AI we can use. We are very well connected to be able to do that, and that has to be probably done more systematically. So to sum up, the war in Ukraine, to sum up what to take from my talk, I guess, the war in Ukraine is greater than a local conflict, and it will reshape digital environment, technologies, and our security effort. Think and analyze that context. 2, security comes with a cost. Do invest and do innovate. Anything that you do, I think that's a very lucrative field to explore. And 3rd, settle in for a long conflict. Don't allow fatigue. Be focused. COVID accelerated our digitization in a way over these 2 years. I'm assured that this war, will accelerate security. And we see that visibly. Finland and Sweden is joining NATO. One could not imagine that happening. So that's a kind of visual outcome of reinforcement of security. But you will face the same monumental shift in digital domain. I remain to be optimist. We owe that to our fellow Ukrainians who are standing currently up for the values and dying. And if there is a will, I'm sure there is a result. So I think the Baltics is a living example of that experience. Thank you.